the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Thursday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great day. And I'm not going to lie, it's June, and we might get a little goofy here on today's Aaron Torres Pod. Here is why. This is what you need to know about today's show. Hope everybody's having a great week. By the way, if you missed it, we had Hassan Diarra from UConn on earlier in the week. He talked a lot about some of the UConn offseason stuff, an interesting perspective on Dan Hurley. Bring it up, though, because today it's all about, well, we got a lot of stuff to cover, okay? So first of all, we don't talk much NBA, but with JJ Redick, my mortal enemy, the guy who called me an F-head on his podcast, he is officially the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. We're going to relive when JJ Redick called me an F-head on the show. You have to listen to this audio, and we might talk a little bit about the job. This isn't the place that you come for hard-hitting NBA analysis, but we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, an interesting story in college hoops. Arkansas, Illinois, Thanksgiving Day on big CBS. To me, this speaks to just how strong the John Calipari brand is. And then finally, we will wrap with 2 college football stories. It's getting to be that time where we start to transition to college football. Urban Meyer, some very interesting quotes on the Ohio State Buckeyes. You wonder if maybe there's something nefarious behind what Urban Meyer said. And also do want to talk a little Alabama football recruiting because Kalen DeBoer, I was told he'd never make it in the SEC. Well, he has the #1 class in the SEC right now. I know a lot can change, but we'll kind of go ahead and quickly wrap on that. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, make sure you're subscribed here on the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day. We've started our college hoops off-season grade series. We did Kentucky a few episodes ago. We did Indiana as a standalone one. I'll probably pop it on the podcast feed at some point. Also, if you're not subscribed on Apple, Spotify, please make sure to do so. Do me a favor. Go on Apple, leave a 5-star rating. Still got a lot of 1 stars from those angry, mean Purdue fans from back in the season. And also, of course, make sure you're following on social media, Aaron_Torres on Twitter, Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram and TikTok. And one other big thing. Monday, we will have a sit-down with ESPN's Fran Fraschilla. A lot of hoops. I just finished with him. He's incredible. I really think you'll love it. We talk a lot of college hoops, a lot of NBA draft stuff. So Fran Fraschilla, ESPN, coming up. With that said, I've rambled long enough to start the show. So with that said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, bluntly, you guys and girls know this show. You know where our bread is buttered. You know that we really don't talk all that much NBA, although based on the NBA Finals ratings, I don't think very many of you care about the NBA. We're not really going to talk about the NBA today, but it is worth noting that JJ Redick, my mortal enemy, a guy that has blocked me on Twitter, is now the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. And so, like I said, if you want the hard-hitting analysis on what this means and what scheme are they going to run and how is he going to run out of bounds plays, there's another podcast for you. But instead, I mostly want to relive the moment that JJ Redick came after me on Twitter. He ended up blocking me because I ended up being 100% right. I mean, it is the most Duke thing that you have ever heard. And also, we'll just talk a little bit about why I think this is a dumb decision, etc., before we get to some college hoops and some college football. So we have new listeners that listen to this show all the time, thousands of new listeners over the course of the last couple months. And so what I want to do is paint a picture as to why I feel the need to talk about JJ Redick today. And it's because the guy called me all sorts of vulgarities on his podcast about 2 years ago, and it's hysterical to relive. You're going to love the audio. The last time I played the audio, everybody in the YouTube comments went bananas. So let's go ahead and get into where my beef with the new Lakers head coach begins. So to tell you the story of the JJ Redick versus Torres dynamic, you got to go back to a simpler time. March of 2022. NCAA tournaments going on. You know, I love college hoops. You know, we talk a lot of college hoops on this show. And in the Elite Eight, there was a game between Houston and Villanova. This was Jay Wright's final year. It ended up being his second to last game. And if you know anything about Jay Wright, if you know anything about Kelvin Sampson, if you know anything about Jay Wright's Villanova teams, Houston under Kelvin Sampson, you know those are two tough, mean, physical teams. And you know, anyone who knows college basketball kind of knew it was going to be a rock fight, right? So we turn on the game. It's low scoring. It's competitive. It's tough. I don't really think much of it. But then as I'm watching the game, I noticed something. I said, all these NBA fans are parachuting. And you know how NBA fans come in, and we see this in college football and the NFL too. You know, somebody will turn on a random Notre Dame USC game on a Saturday, and an NFL fan, oh, this product is so terrible. And that was essentially what happened here in this NCAA tournament game. Physical game, low scoring game, whatever. And I start to see all of these NBA fans coming in talking about, oh, this is college basketball is so unwatchable. It's the worst sport ever. I don't know how people watch this. And so I'm sitting there on the couch. I'm watching people criticize the sport that I love so much. And I decided to just put out a little tweet that I didn't really think much of. So the tweet, producer Matt, pop it up. This was from March of 2022. All I said was this. I love all the arguments I'm seeing today about the quality of play in college hoops or the product or whatever. Trust me, if NBA teams played 48 minutes of defense like Houston and Villanova are tonight, we'd see a lot of games in the 70s and 80s in that league too. Thank you, producer Matt. Appreciate that. So I put out that tweet, didn't really think anything of it, go back to watching the game, and all of a sudden, my phone just starts going crazy. Just boom, 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 boom. A lot of comments, a lot of whatever. NBA Twitter gets a hold of it. I am the college basketball homer that claims that college basketball is the best thing that has ever been played ever. When in reality, all I was saying was that the college game is different than the pro game. The level of physicality allowed in college is different. And again, if Villanova and if NBA teams were allowed to play like Villanova and Houston, then guess what would happen? We'd have a lot of low-scoring games. So NBA Twitter's going crazy. And then, just when I think this is about to end, the king of NBA Twitter, Mr. Arrogance himself, JJ Redick, descends from the heavens. And here's what he had to say about my thought that if NBA teams were allowed to play defense the way that college teams are, we'd see a lot of games in the 70s and the 80s. Here's what JJ Redick tweeted. Tell me, this is his direct quote. This is the Los Angeles Lakers head coach. Tell me you don't watch the NBA without telling me you don't watch the NBA. Oh my goodness, I'm so smart. I know everything. I'm JJ Redick. And so whatever, I took the L. I didn't really think much of it. My point, I believed, still stood, which was that, again, different sport, different game, different rules, different refereeing style. And that ultimately, I think that if NBA teams were allowed to defend, not that they don't defend, but if they were allowed to defend with the physicality of a Villanova or a Houston, then we'd see a lot of low-scoring games. Left it there, didn't think anything of it. My buddy JJ Redick wasn't quite done yet. That's because, what was it, about 2 weeks later, season's over, Final Four's done, I'm back in California doing some work, and my phone goes crazy. I must have gotten 20 texts, 20 tweets, 20 DMs, and everybody's like, Torres, did you hear what JJ Redick said about you on his podcast? And I'm like, no, why would JJ Redick be talking about me on his podcast? It's an NBA podcast. So he has Kevin Durant on his pod. And producer Matt, do you have the clip ready? Here is what JJ Redick, this was fresh off of him saying, tell me you don't know NBA basketball without telling me you don't know NBA basketball.
Knucklehead said, if NBA teams played defense as hard as college kids, I bet you the scores would be in the 70s and 80s too. First of all, I mean, it's just math. First of all, the shot clock's longer. So there's going to be more possessions in an NBA game. And there's 8 more minutes of basketball. So, fuckhead, that's not possible. But secondly,
there it is. The new Lakers head coach calling me an F-head. Producer Matt, play it one more time just for effect, if you don't mind.
Knucklehead said, if NBA teams played defense as hard as college kids, I bet you the scores would be in the 70s and 80s too. First of all, I mean, it's just math. First of all, the shot clock's longer. So there's going to be more possessions in an NBA game. And there's 8 more minutes of basketball. So, fuckhead, that's not possible. But secondly,
that was JJ Redick, the current Lakers head coach, calling your boy Torres an F-head on his podcast. So, first of all, incredible, right? Guy, first of all, it cracks me up. First of all, let me even backtrack. What I said is not what he said. He said, well, if NBA players played so hard, I never said that. But 2, it's not really about that. I find it hysterical. He had Kevin Durant. By the way, that audio was courtesy of Old Man in the 3. Don't need YouTube taking down this video for playing that without crediting it. But that's Old Man in the 3. But that is the current Lakers head coach calling your boy an F-head. And so to bring it full circle, oh, by the way, I didn't even finish. JJ eventually blocked me, and here's why. It's because once the playoffs started, a funny thing happened. Teams started scoring in the 70s and 80s. And so, of course, because I'm Torres, because I'm from the East Coast, because I don't start fights, but I finish them, every single time that a team scored in the 70s or 80s for the rest of the season, I made sure to tag them. I made sure to say, hey, JJ, I know you were just talking about me with KD on your pod, but just wanted to know, did you see the Dallas-Minnesota game? Dallas only put up 84. Hey, JJ, did you see the Minnesota-Utah game? Minnesota only put up 78. And I eventually did this, and eventually all of you guys and girls that listen to this show ended up tagging him every time something happened, said, Torres is right, Torres is right, Torres is right. And it's especially funny to me because what I find especially funny is look at the final scores of the NBA Finals games that JJ Redick himself just called, okay? So remember, we just finished an NBA Finals. Remember, JJ Redick called me an F-head because he said teams don't score in the 70s and the 80s in the NBA. Well, here was the final score of Game 5 of the NBA Finals. Boston 106, Dallas 88. Game 4, Dallas 122, Boston 84. Game 1, Dallas loses 107-89. So I find it especially funny that of the 3 NBA Finals games, of the last 5 games that he called at ESPN, 3 of them ended up in the 80s. This is who you are getting, Lakers fans. You are getting a sensitive guy who, oh, by the way, thinks he's so whatever. I'm not even going to criticize because you know what? He's the Lakers head coach. I just find it so funny that dude now has one of the most prominent jobs in the NBA. And this is a dude that blocks people when somebody, just a dude with a podcast and a YouTube channel and whatever, ends up being 100% right, he gets mad and ends up blocking him. Now, in terms of the job itself, and again, this isn't the place that we're going to spend the Lakers, they need to use the mid-level exception here. Like, great NBA podcast that'll give you all that information. What I'll say is a couple things. As far as the job itself, not surprised at all. This was how it was going to go down. And we said it a little bit with the Dan Hurley stuff when Dan Hurley interviewed. The Dan Hurley story never made sense because all you had to do was look at the facts of the situation with JJ Redick and the Lakers. The Lakers fired Darvin Ham on May 4th and basically do one interview until all of a sudden Dan Hurley appears out of nowhere. In the process, they're leaking all these stories. You know, the Lakers feel that, and you can Google this. Somebody just sent me this story right now because they couldn't believe it. I said, oh yeah, that's been out for weeks. The Lakers are leaking all these stories that JJ Redick is the new Pat Riley And he's got a lot of the same vibes as Pat Riley when he was in his 30s and 40s. So the Lakers are leaking stories. They do like one interview pre-Hurley. And listen, producer Matt, pop up what I said. Oh, by the way, one more thing is JJ Redick was asked about his future as an NBA head coach before the finals. He says, I'll address it after the playoffs. And so I never bought that and we don't have to relitigate the whole Dan Hurley thing, but people were going crazy with me when Dan Hurley interviewed for the Lakers job. Here's what I said on that Friday when he interviewed paraphrasing for the Lakers job. Producer Matt, throw up the tweet whenever you can. So I said, listen, I was headed to Vegas, I'm about to board a plane, and I said, but since a million of you asked, my response on the Dan Hurley news has not changed. This all ends with both sides getting what they want. Hurley gets a big contract extension, and the Lakers claim they did a real coaching search before hiring LeBron's podcast and drinking buddy. And that's exactly what happened. Listen, again, there's other places to analyze NBA hires and what they mean and will they be good. But when I look at this hire, like, this was always the way it was going to be. And my only other real thought from the JJ Redick perspective is, I don't really get why he's doing it. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. And part of this was the Dan Hurley thing. I said, Dan Hurley, listen, I'm not saying UConn is a better job than the Lakers, but I think UConn in the current moment, what Dan Hurley has built is better than the Lakers now, with an aging 40-year-old LeBron James and an understanding, whether they're admitting it or not, that you're going to have to draft and develop his son. And so my only thought from JJ Redick's perspective is, listen, I can criticize the guy. I can mock him because he called me an F-head on his podcast. But at the same time, that guy is really good in the media. I wasn't great as an NBA Finals broadcaster, but that podcast that he has is a beast. It's a monster, 1.1 million subscribers. He's making good money off that. My guess is that he is probably making millions from ESPN to call the NBA Finals and to call playoff games. And so my only real takeaway is, you want to coach, that's great, but it's almost like the Dan Hurley thing. There's going to be a better situation where you're in better position to succeed and better position to have long-term success than with the Lakers. The Lakers, as I said, when Dan Hurley interviewed, they're a poverty organization. They're not well run. LeBron controls everything, and LeBron gets otherwise really good coaches fired. The last two coaches that the Lakers have had, Darvin Ham made the Western Conference Finals in his first season, gets fired a year later. Frank Vogel wins an NBA title in 2020. He's out by the end of the 22 season. And so from the JJ Redick perspective, again, live your life how you want, but you have two really good media gigs that are paying you very, very, very well. And the idea that you're going to go be LeBron's caddy, I know you're his drinking buddy, I know you're his podcast buddy, but that you're going to go be LeBron's caddy, that you're going to go, whatever. Like it just, I think there was a better opportunity. So that's my big thing. Thought it'd be fun on a Thursday here in June to relitigate and relive and revisit the audio of JJ Redick calling me an F-head. But I'll just tell you this, man. I think I can't call it career suicide because he'll obviously have a job in broadcasting when it's all said and done. But this is why I didn't think it made sense for Dan Hurley to take the job. You have a good job now. You're going to get fired in 2 years and then put your tail between your legs and go back to college. And by the way, not because Dan Hurley's not a good coach and not because JJ Redick might not be a good head coach, but it's because the situation with the Lakers is not a good situation, especially in the West with a young Denver team, 2 stars entering their prime. Minnesota's not going anywhere. Oklahoma City's not going anywhere. Dallas obviously isn't going anywhere. I don't really get it from the JJ Redick perspective. Listen, JJ, let me put it this way, buddy. It's a math equation, F-head. It's a math equation, buddy. There's too many good teams. Your team's not going to be good enough. But hey, JJ Redick, you want to be the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers, good luck. But I will be watching, and I'm not going to lie, I'll be sort of laughing if you struggle with the job because I don't know what to tell you, F-head. It's a tough job. All right, let's go ahead and switch gears. Let's get back on course here. Enough of JJ Redick calling me an F-head that one time. Let's get back on track. Let's get to our, the bread and butter of what we do here on the Aaron Torres pod. Let's talk some college sports. Let's talk college basketball. Listen, it's a quiet time. We have started our off-season grade series. We started with Mark Pope, Kentucky. We did Indiana the other day as a standalone clip. But there was one piece of news in college basketball. We'll keep the basketball stories together, then we'll get to football. There is one piece of basketball news that I thought was at least worth discussing. It's not a big, oh my God, this is the biggest story ever. But it's an interesting story, especially in June. And I think it speaks to something much bigger that maybe nobody else is really going to talk about. And it was scheduling news that we got involving John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks on Thursday afternoon. There had been reports. My buddy Jackson Collier from, I believe, Hogbeat, I believe is the website. Good friend of mine. He's a great reporter. He had put out a day or two ago that there was talks of Arkansas trying to schedule a Big Ten team. And Arkansas' schedule is starting to come together. We found out last week that they're playing Miami in the ACC-SEC Challenge. Think they could have gotten a better opponent, but that's neither here nor there. And also found out that they're going to play Michigan at Madison Square Garden in the Jimmy V Classic. But on Thursday, like I said, my buddy Jackson Collier had reported they're going to play a Big Ten team. And we got word from Illinois AD Josh Whitman that Arkansas and Illinois will play on Thanksgiving Day in Kansas City. Now, if this was just about a random one-off neutral site game, I don't think I'd be talking about it. But they're playing in Kansas City on Thanksgiving Day. How about this? They're playing on CBS, a nationally broadcast, what do you call it? The traditional non-cable, and they're doing it after the Lions-Bears game on Thanksgiving Day. And so what this says to me, it's going to be a really good game. We're going to talk about that. But you know what it also says? It says the Calipari brand is strong and well. And bluntly, I don't think this game gets scheduled, certainly not on CBS, if it isn't for the presence of John Calipari. Now, in terms of the game, listen, we don't need to start, we did this with college football the other day. We looked at the week 1, week 2, week 3, week 5 lines, whatever. And what did I say? I'm not going to overanalyze Ohio State, Michigan football here in June when the game's not being played till November. This one is also not being played till November. So I'm not going to oversell. It's going to be the game of the year. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. But what it will be, it should be a very good game between two, what I believe will be top 20 or so teams going into the season. Arkansas, we've talked about a lot. They've done a great job. You can criticize Cal for whatever. He has put together a heck of a 9-man scholarship roster. DJ Wagner, I think, is going to be very improved. John L. Davis, Jonas Adu. We don't have to go through the whole roster. But really good, really balanced. They only have 9. They got to stay healthy. We know that. But that, to me, is on paper as good as any team in the SEC. I would argue Illinois is actually probably as good as anybody on paper in the Big Ten. Illinois returns a couple key pieces from that Elite Eight team. We know Coleman Hawkins has gone to Kansas State. We know Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to be in the NBA. But at the same time, we also know they do bring back a couple key pieces, Ty Rodgers, etc. And they added a lot of pieces that I like. I think Kylan Boswell from Arizona returning to Illinois will be good. It'll be good for his career. I do like Trey White, who's kind of bounced around, started at USC, played at Louisville last year. Like some of the other transfers as well, Jake Davis, the shooter from Mercer, on and on. And so 1, 2 really good teams. I think the environment will be great. I did the drive this year from Fayetteville to Kansas City. It's about Arkansas fans, you know better, but about a 3.5, 4-hour drive, very doable. Because remember, I did Arkansas, Duke, and then I did Kansas and UConn on over the course of 3 nights. So I went to Arkansas, Duke, drove up to Kansas City. The next night I went to Kansas versus UConn. University of Kansas is about 30 or so minutes from Kansas City. So it's an easy drive. Illinois fans travel great. So I think it'll be a great atmosphere. But why I wanted to talk about it, why I feel like this is something that's at least, again, we're not going to spend 22 minutes on it, but a quick 6, 7, 8 minutes, whatever. This to me speaks to the John Calipari brand. Because at the end of the day, this is no disrespect, but I don't think this game gets played without John Calipari. But what CBS says is this, is that, you know what? We have a super marquee NFL game on that Thursday. How do we retain the audience? What is the thing that we do to keep the most audience possible on our channel rather than them flipping over to the next game, which is Cowboys-Giants? And most people are going to watch Cowboys-Giants, so I'm not, whatever. What do? Well, we put on Illinois because the Bears are playing. And what is one of the biggest brands that we can possibly get? There are some really big brands in college basketball: UConn, Kentucky, Carolina, Duke. But John Calipari is a pretty darn big brand in his own right. And I just don't think this game happens without it. But what CBS sees is the opportunity to capture and retain a huge part of that audience. We saw it last year. Fox, they had ironically, the Lions and the Packers on Thanksgiving Day. What did they do right after? Michigan State versus Arizona. I looked it up today just to make sure. Did 5.2 million viewers. People that just stayed to watch Michigan State that were watching the Lions, just wanted to watch college hoops. And so this game will now be played. But again, it's the Calipari effect. And it speaks to, let me also say this. Let me give John Calipari an ounce of credit here, because again, I know anytime you say anything nice about him, oh, he stinks and he's going to blow it in March. Well, the one thing I will say, I am even myself, as a guy who covers this sport, a little bit surprised at how Cal is kind of operating the same way at Arkansas that he did at Kentucky. That's not a knock on Arkansas. It's not a knock on Kentucky. But even going back to that night when he announced that he was leaving, it was stunning. Or he didn't announce it. My buddy Wes Moore broke the story. But when that story came out, I remember thinking like, oh, this is going to be good and it's going to be interesting. But is Cal still going to be able to keep the same interest at Arkansas that he did at Kentucky? Well, so far, so good, because the roster has come together very nicely. First off, I think it's important to note he's still recruiting at an elite level. Boogie Flan, 5-star McDonald's All-American, is following him. Carter Knox, 5-star McDonald's All-American, is following him. Billy Richmond, 4-star, who I believe has NBA upside, is following him. He got several of those key guys from Kentucky to follow him too. Adu Thiero, Big Z, DJ Wagner. And of course, I think maybe the most impressive thing that he did was get John L. Davis from Florida Atlantic, get Jonas Adu from Tennessee, and of course, Trevin Brazil to return for that 9-man rotation. But what that says to me, if a John L. Davis only has 1 year and he can play pretty much anywhere in college basketball and he chooses Calipari, it says the Calipari brand is still strong. And then to take it to another level, for CBS to say, what is the game that we can put on Thanksgiving Day? This isn't, a Saturday in March where they're playing college basketball anyway. This is CBS saying, we want to capture the audience. What can we do? What's different? And it kind of goes back to what we talked about last week when the ACC SEC challenge games were announced. I said, look, I think that ESPN whiffed here because you are reintroduced in late November, early December, when that game will be played against Miami. You're reintroducing your audience to college basketball. A lot of them aren't going to remember that John Calipari is the head coach at Arkansas, that he left Kentucky. And so to put them against Miami on some random game that wouldn't draw what you would if they were playing Duke or Carolina or somebody like that, Louisville even, I thought it was a big whiff by them. I thought it was a big whiff when Kentucky and Arkansas are only playing once. So credit to CBS. They see the light the way that Torres does. They see the value that Calipari will bring. And I'll tell you this, Thanksgiving Day in the Torres house, I might have to go into the corner or the side room because this is going to be a heck of a game. The first marquee game of the Calipari era, I would assume. And I, for one, cannot wait. As I said, they'll also play Miami out of conference. They'll also, of course, play Michigan in the Big Ten or in the Jimmy V Classic in New York as well. But again, people want to see Calipari. People love him. People hate him. But people are certainly interested. And so credit CBS for putting together a heck of a game. Tell you what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, come back, I'm going to switch to a couple what I deem to be pretty interesting football topics. One, you see what Urban Meyer said about Ohio State? Said something very interesting, and I think there might be some ulterior motives behind it. Also, shout out to the 15 other SEC fan bases that told me that Kalen DeBoer didn't know what he was doing. He had no shot at Alabama. We got some interesting recruiting news that I think is at least worth discussing. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. So do want to go ahead and switch gears. First of all, make sure if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in. I am not on YouTube right now. Producer Matt is monitoring. I assume everybody's just arguing amongst themselves. It's what the chat does best, but I don't really mind. So make sure to drop questions. Appreciate you here on a Thursday night in June. And the good news is we are going to have plenty to talk about over the next couple weeks and months as football ramps up, But then also beyond that, I think we're going to have other stuff that pops up to talk about. With that said, speaking of football, do want to go ahead and switch gears and do want to talk a little bit about a program that we talked quite a bit about here on the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel over the course of the football season and beyond. That is the Ohio State Buckeyes. And if you listen to this pod, you know I have been pretty critical of Ryan Day, okay? Listen, it's nothing personal. I know everybody thinks that this media personality hates your team anytime they're critical. But what I've said about Ryan Day is pretty straightforward. I get that his record is 56-8 overall. I understand that he really has no real bad losses on his resume. I mean, the guy that you see on the corner of your screen, Urban Meyer, won a national championship. He also lost to Purdue. Also got smoked at Iowa. So I get why people think that I'm too tough on Ryan Day. But what I also say is this. The bottom line with Ohio State is you have one job. You know how Mark Pope said at his introductory press conference? I understand the assignment. The assignment at Ohio State is pretty straightforward. Beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, compete for national championships. And over the last 3 years, we all know that Ohio State hasn't done it. 0-3 against Michigan. Has not won a Big Ten championship. Ironically, they were probably closer to a national championship a few years ago when they played Georgia. But I only bring it up because I've been critical of Ryan Day, but I also have to call a spade a spade. Season ends, disappointing loss in the Cotton Bowl, and Ryan Day did about as good of a job as anybody could have done in the midst of a disappointing season by Ohio State standards. What does he do? Crush it. First of all, signs the number 2-3 class in the country, whatever it was. Jeremiah Smith, wide receiver, number 1 player in America. Then he destroys the portal. Brings in Will Howard at quarterback. Brings in Julian Sayin at quarterback, transfer from Alabama, 5-star kid. Caleb Downs, maybe the best freshman defensive player in America last year. And, of course, also adds Quinshon Judkins, multiple-time 1,000-yard rusher to that squad. And that, by the way, is on top of that top 5 recruiting class. And the fact that, to his credit, convinced a lot of those guys, those NFL draft guys that weren't surefire first-rounders to return. Leading rusher, Travion Henderson, back. Second leading receiver at the wide receiver position, Emeka Ibuka, back. JT Tuimoloau, potential first-round pick. They all return to what is a very, very, very good team. So I can be critical of Ryan Day. I can also own the fact that, oh, by the way, he did about as good as anybody could have expected this offseason. So that's my opinion. By the way, it's backed up by the Vegas lines. We talked about those week 1 lines on Monday's show. When, of course, if you remember, Ohio State, Circa loves Ohio State. They're a 9-point favorite at home against Michigan. They're a 1-point road favorite against Oregon. They're a 5-point road favorite at Penn State. In other words, 3 top 10 teams, they are expected to win and win convincingly, even though 2 of them are on the road. So all that's a long-winded way of saying expectations are high at Ohio State. But at the same time, there is somebody that might have taken those expectations and pushed them right through the roof, and that is their former head coach, Urban Meyer. Did you see what Urban Meyer said about the Ohio State Buckeyes earlier this week? He told Adam King of 10 TV in Columbus, quote, "As of now, this is one of the most talented rosters in the last decade, maybe ever." I mean, that's a big statement. They've got to play. But you look at the quality of athlete at every position, I've never seen anything like it. To which I say, that's kind of a crazy, crazy quote from Urban Meyer. I think what it also speaks to is expectations are through the roof in Columbus. But I also wonder if maybe there's a little something nefarious going on with Urban Meyer and his decision to say that. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, let me say this. This is no disrespect to Ohio State. This is not one of the best. This is not the best team in the last decade. This is not one of the best teams of all time, even on paper. Okay, that's no disrespect. Doesn't mean they can't win the Big Ten. Doesn't mean that they're not in the short conversation of national championship favorites with Georgia. But they have questions. I think even an Ohio State fan would admit the O-line needs to be much better. And I think even an Ohio State fan would admit, like, is Will Howard really the guy? But by the way, does it matter? You have Chip Kelly calling plays, and Will Howard's got more weapons than he'll ever know what to do with. So maybe it really doesn't matter. But I think even Ohio State fans would say it's not the best team of the last decade. I think you could even argue Urban Meyer's 2015 team, the year after they won the national championship, and Ezekiel Elliott, Joey Bosa, all those quarterbacks, Cardale Jones, JT Barrett, Braxton Miller moved to wide receiver, Michael Thomas is there. You go on, that team was insane as well. So one, I don't think that this is the best team ever, whatever. But two, I do wonder, why would Urban Meyer say it? It's not, nobody just says something like this in June if there's not something behind it. And I think there is. I think there's two things, one a little less nefarious than the others. The first thing I think is probably realistically, I do think Urban Meyer's probably sitting there saying, I handed this guy the keys to a freaking Maserati. It might, if Ohio State wasn't the best program in college football when Urban Meyer stepped aside, it was a clear number 2 behind Alabama, maybe number 3 behind Clemson. I mean, we're picking at straws here. They were the 3 elite programs in college football. And while Ryan Day hasn't totally crashed the Maserati, we also have to acknowledge, as I always say, when you're the Ohio State coach, it isn't about beating Rutgers and Indiana. It's about beating Michigan, winning the Big Ten, and what we just said. Well, you look at Ryan Day, lost to Michigan the last 3 years, got embarrassed in that bowl game by Missouri. And I think what Urban Meyer is kind of saying is, dude, no more excuses. Let's go. I gave you an elite program operating at the highest level. And what we can't deny, the program's kind of regressed a little bit every year the further away we've gotten from the Urban Meyer era. Year 1, undefeated, Big Ten champ, make the college football playoff. Could have beaten Clemson, don't. Year 2, make the college football playoff, but it's that weird COVID year. They only play 5 games. A couple of the games are not even impressive, whatever. Then you get into this most recent era where they're struggling, losing to Michigan, et cetera, et cetera. So the program hasn't flatlined, but it's not the same. And I think part of it, too, from Urban Meyer's perspective, part of it is I think what would frustrate him, what you could see on the sideline when they lost to Michigan for a 3rd straight time last year, it's not that the program's falling apart, but it's not what he left Ryan Day. And also, let's also use the word that we use to describe Ohio State. They can be a little bit soft at some points. It's funny, if you go back to that Ohio State-Michigan game, remember they were doing the weird TikTok dance on the field before, and everybody's having a good time? And Ohio State fans, you know what I'm talking about. People juxtapose, I don't even know how to say the word, juxtapose, whatever. They put one video next to the other of Urban Meyer's last Michigan game where the players look like they're ready to go to war. They're hitting their helmets and they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And so I think Urban Meyer's sitting there like, dude, I'll ramp up the pressure on you because I left you the best program, one of the best programs in college football. We're still good, but it ain't what I left you. 2, though, let me ask you a question. Can we be honest? Is this a little bit of a nefarious Urban Meyer attempt to maybe, just maybe, not saying definitively, but just maybe, try and get basically him saying, like, if this falls apart, basically what I believe he's saying is this team should win a national championship. If they fall apart, there's no excuse. But you know who could have won a national championship with this team? This guy right here, Urban freaking Meyer. And so, yes, I do think he kind of put it out there to let him know this team should win a national championship. If it doesn't, you should probably move on from this guy. And guess who might just be available to help coach him going forward? Now, I know what people say, oh, Torres, that's the hottest take ever. That's so stupid. It's not grounded in anything. Urban Meyer said, oh, the right. No, he's a grandfather now. And he loves being in Columbus with his grandkids and blah, 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 blah. I don't buy that, okay? First off, I've said this a million times. Urban Meyer is 59 years old right now. He'll be 60 in July. So he's not young, but he's not old either. Nick Saban just retired at 72 years old. Nick Saban retired 13 years older than what Urban Meyer is right now. Kirk Ferentz just won the Big Ten West at 66, 67 years old. Mac Brown is still going strong. And so I've said from the beginning, I truly believe Urban Meyer has one more run in him. And remember, Urban Meyer's not a guy that builds it and hangs out for 10 years. He builds it, he puts everything he has into it, and then it falls. And so, not falls, but he's a guy that burns himself out. Whatever it was, 5-6 years at Florida, 5-6 years at Ohio State, and it ended. I think also the way that it ended at Ohio State and the way that it certainly ended with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Listen, I know people who know Urban Meyer. I'm not going to claim that I do. None of them believe that he wants the last page of his coaching biography to be that Jacksonville Jaguars debacle. And we all remember what it was and what it wasn't, and allegedly kicking a player and the girl at the bar and all that good stuff. So he's only 59. One more chapter left. And I think the other thing that's interesting is this. Urban was very outspoken about, I'll never coach in the NIL era, and I can't imagine a player making $1 million, and how could I get him to go to philosophy class? Like, essentially what he's saying is, like, I can't coach in the NIL era. But I bring it up because the counter to that is also this. He said that 2-3 years ago. We're now in year 3-4 of the NIL era, and I think we're kind of at a place where we kind of get what the NIL era is. This is how you handle it. This is how you build out a collective. This is how much money you need. We're getting revenue sharing next year. But this is the budget that you need to get the players that you need to win at the highest level. And so, yeah, you could say I never want to coach in the portal era or the NIL era, but NIL is kind of figured out, and the portal just benefits a place like Ohio State. Ohio State is very rarely ever going to lose guys that they want to keep, but you can also kind of kick to the curb a bunch of guys that you don't want. I remember when Georgia last year, they lost like 21, 22 guys to the portal after the season. And I remember texting somebody close to the Georgia program, and I said, of those 22 guys, 21 guys, whatever it was, how many were you actually upset that you lost? And they gave me they were like 1, maybe 2. But most of them we were expecting. Most of them we had the honest conversation. Hey, you're not going to play here. You're getting recruited over. There's not a spot for you, whatever. And so I think we're kind of at that point now where I think Urban Meyer wants one more run. And that's what this quote said to me is like, bro, you got a national championship team. If you can't do it this year, there's no excuses. If you can't do it this year, you have nobody to blame but yourself. But also, if you can't do it this year, then guess what? I think I can. Now, by the way, it's worth noting, because I know Ohio State fans are going to flood the mentions on this when we clip it off and all that good stuff. But there's a difference between Urban Meyer wanting the job and would the new AD Ross Bjork ever hire him? That's a completely different conversation. And I get that conversation from the Ohio State perspective. He can want, but if nobody's going to, I don't know that Ross Bjork, the AD, has kind of it just doesn't feel like the kind of hire that he would make. But I'll tell you this, if Ohio State loses for a third time to Michigan, they get punked at the line of scrimmage, I do believe there's going to be a big contingent of Ohio State fans, and you can disagree. Please let me know in the comments section if you agree or disagree. I think there's going to be a lot of Ohio State fans that really do push for Urban Meyer, kind of longing for that day where they were the tougher, meaner, more physical team. We'll see what happens, but I don't think that quote means absolutely nothing. Final story, college football story, another one that we're not going to spend 22 minutes on this, 18 minutes, whatever. But there was one other story that I think is worth at least covering. And as you can see on the screen, it comes from the beautiful city of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Now, it may not be beautiful to producer Matt, Auburn alum, Auburn diehard. He's given me I think they were thumbs down on the, off air. They could have just been two middle fingers. I don't really know, but it's okay. We got to talk about Alabama. It's okay. We'll be okay, producer Matt. You'll survive. But anyway, all right. So Alabama, right? So want to talk about Kalen DeBoer, but I want to talk kind of holistically because something happened this week that was interesting. And I don't talk a ton of recruiting on this show from the college football perspective because college football and college basketball are so different. College basketball, one player can change everything, right? A Cooper Flagg commits to Duke, it changes the whole trajectory of their season. And RJ Davis announces he's returning. It changes the whole trajectory to North Carolina season. Hunter Dickinson commits out of the portal. It changes the whole trajectory of the season. Not really like that in football. Even when you get a 5-star kid, I mean, look at Arch Manning, one of the most hyped quarterbacks that we've seen. Hasn't played a meaningful snap heading into year 2 and probably won't, if all things go well, play a meaningful snap until year 3. Even the good ones, Caleb Williams, didn't start. So the point I'm trying to make, college football recruiting is more about the totality of players that you sign, not any individual one guy. But I bring it up because I saw something this week that I thought was interesting. Alabama got a commitment from a offensive tackle out of the beautiful state of California named Jackson Lloyd, 6'7", 290 pounds. Really good player. I'm not going to evaluate him here. Again, that's not really my strength. But this was a guy that had offers from Ohio State, from Auburn, from Florida, from all of the big programs in college football. Well, I bring it up because Jackson Lloyd was just another recruit in what is quickly becoming a really good class for Alabama. They had an insane May. They had an insane June. And now we're looking up at the recruiting rankings. And here's what you need to know about Alabama. They have the number 3 recruiting class in the country behind only Ohio State and Notre Dame. Notre Dame, by the way, has taken a ton of players. So the per player rating is much lower at Notre Dame. So essentially outside of Ohio State, Alabama has the number 2 class in the country. The number 1 class in the SEC. By the way, they have a huge recruiting weekend coming up. But I just bring it up to say one quick thing. It is that for all the people that said that Kalen DeBoer had no chance at Alabama, how is he going to recruit in the SEC? I'm here to say, so far, so good. And oh, by the way, I understand because we're going to get the Georgia and Tennessee fans and we're like, oh, it's June, it doesn't matter. Let's see what happens on National Signing Day. And I get it. But what I would also say is, I think Kalen DeBoer is kind of proving that he's going to be okay in the SEC. Now, first of all, let me say this. I think even before this recruiting run that now has them number 3 in the country, number 1 in the SEC, I thought that whole narrative was nonsense. First of all, the idea that he can't recruit at an elite level, he never really had the chance. Remember, this was a guy that basically did it at the lower levels. Started in the NAIA, we know that, came up as a coordinator in a bunch of different stops, goes to Indiana as a coordinator, goes to Fresno State, then goes to Washington. This guy's only coached 2 years of Power 5, now Power 4 football. So the idea that he can't do it, can he not do it? Or did he just not have the opportunity to do it? Because he only signed, 2 classes at Washington. The first one's kind of a throwaway class when he took over. And so he signed 1 full class at Washington. So it's not like this guy's been at the Power 5 for 10 years and never signed a top 30 class. He's been at the Power 5 for 2 years. First class is a throwaway. And his first class at Washington, wasn't great, but would have been okay, would have been fine. And it would have been even better this past year coming off a national championship. So just because he didn't sign an elite class in 2023 in his only full recruiting class at Washington, by the way, I want to look it up to make sure that I have it right. Let's pull up the 2023 recruiting rankings really quick. He did sign the number 26 class. So it's not great. But for Washington, it's not terrible. And that was the only class that he signed in the power conference levels. Again, if he had been there 10 years, that's a different conversation. Beyond that, though, beyond the fact that it's a stupid narrative, I just never believed it. First of all, you know what the most impressive thing that Kalen DeBoer has done since he got to Alabama? It's not the 2025 class. It's walking into that locker room after Nick Saban left he had 85 guys that could have gone anywhere else. And he basically, the final tally is, as of right now, basically lost like one marquee player, right? Caden Proctor leaves but comes back. Julian Sayin only leaves because he brings in his own quarterback. So Caden Proctor was their starting right tackle. Julian Sayin was a 5-star quarterback who left because Kalen DeBoer brought in his own quarterback. So yeah, you don't want to lose Caleb Downs. I get it. But think about all the guys that decided they are going to stay. That was his biggest recruiting win, but I just never bought this notion that he couldn't do it. You know why? And I've said this, my buddy Ryan Fowler, I go on with him every week on Tide 100.9, is that basically I never doubted Kalen DeBoer because smart people who have had success at every step of the way, they figure it out. And if they don't have a great skill set, they hire people who do, right? And I've used this example before. I think I'm pretty good. You put a mic in front of me. I'm not great every show, but I'm pretty good at talking about whatever the big stories are, being interesting, whatever. What I'm not great at doing is creating great graphics, great videos, great YouTube shorts, great Instagram reels, whatever. That's why we brought on producer Matt. I know what my weaknesses are. And so Kalen DeBoer, I never worried about it because he's smart enough to know, hey, if recruiting in the South is not my strength, let me go find some people that know what the heck they're doing. And so if you remember, when he took the Alabama job, who was the only other person that was on the plane with him outside of his family? It was Courtney Morgan, a guy named Courtney Morgan, who's his general manager, player personnel guy. In other words, he said, I'll figure out the offensive coordinator later, the defensive coordinator later, the special teams coordinator later. I need to make sure my player personnel guy is coming with me because this guy helped me build a national champion runner-up at Washington. And oh, by the way, he was at Michigan the year before. And then shortly after that, they make more hires to the player personnel staff. We talked about this months ago. The guy, Aaron Hodges, he's a player personnel guy. Everywhere he goes, they sign the top class in school history. He was at Purdue. They signed the best class they ever signed. Kansas, I think it was TCU, not Kansas State. TCU, best class they've ever signed. And so this is what Kalen DeBoer is going to do. Now, I understand a couple things. One, it's early. We're not going to oversell it. We're not going to celebrate it as if he's the greatest recruiter that's ever lived, and there's never going to be a drop-off without Nick Saban. Nick Saban's probably the greatest recruiter who ever did live, and so there's going to be a natural drop-off. Two, other schools are going to make their moves. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, they're going to end National Signing Day ahead of Georgia. No, Georgia's awesome. Kirby Smart's awesome. Miami's really good with Mario Cristobal. Whoever, fill in the blank, is really like LSU is going to come on strong. We know how this works. So I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend that, oh, it's over. Another 20 years. But at the same time, we can only judge the show tonight based on what we know in this moment. And what we know in this moment is that Kalen DeBoer has the best class in the SEC, one of the best classes in the country. And I don't think he's slowing down anytime soon. By the way, also worth noting, as good as it's been, we might have to do an update on Monday's show because Alabama has a monster weekend visitor list coming in. By the way, I'm sure you saw this would have been another topic if we had had time, but USC lost 2 5-star defensive line commitments in the last 72 hours. How about this? One of them, a kid by the name of Justice Terry from Georgia, the number 1 ranked defensive lineman in America, according to On3, decommits from USC and is visiting Alabama this weekend. Now, we're not a recruiting show. I'm not going to claim I have insight. It seems like Georgia is probably the favorite, but I only bring it up to say, you know what that is? That is Kalen DeBoer having smart people on his staff that know the landscape, know, hey, this kid's about to decommit. Let's make sure that we get this kid to campus as soon as possible. So this Kalen DeBoer recruiting run isn't going to slow down anytime soon. Producer Matt, I have a feeling we probably don't have very many questions today. I know the chat, the chat lives, in its own little universe here, but that's okay. It's June. I know there's a lot of angry, I know there's a lot of people that are going to love to bicker and argue in these comment sections. That's okay. We're going to, I think, go ahead and get out of here. Probably not much else to talk about. Probably not much else to talk about here on today's show. Trying to think of if anything else is popping up here over the course of the last couple of days. I think that's basically it. But yeah, tell you what, I think that's it. It's a Friday. It's June. we got plenty of time to do the lengthy deep dive episodes in the future. So with that said, let's go ahead and get out of here. By the way, for people who are still in the chat, my girl Pam, everybody, I appreciate your support. But I think we will get out of here for today. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you're subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead and give us a quick 5 stars. Make sure you're subscribed on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Aaron Torres. Put on that notification so you know every single day when we go live. Truly appreciate your support. We'll be back Monday. No Sunday show. Well, if something happens, we'll be back Sunday. But Monday show, and I'll tell you this. Fran Fraschilla from ESPN will join us Monday. I already recorded the interview. It's unbelievable. We talk a lot of college hoops. He covers the Big 12 for ESPN, broadcasts the Big 12 for ESPN, and also talk NBA draft, which is next week. And beyond that, we talk a little college hoops as well. Big 12, as I said. He has some thoughts on John Calipari to Arkansas, on and on. But I think it's time for me to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support. A Thursday night in June. We're still going strong, and we're only going to ramp up as we get closer to football. But that's all for today's show. Appreciate your support. I'll be back on Monday with Fran Fraschilla. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. Unblock me. Maybe don't unblock me. You got bigger things. You got bigger fish to fry. You're the head coach of the Lakers right now, my man. Tell you what, everybody, have a great weekend. I'll be back Monday. New episode. Aaron Torres.